It's late at night in a crowded U.S. international terminal. Your long flight has finally landed after 14 straight hours in the air. Your back hurts, your eyes sting, and all you're thinking about is a shower and a bed. But between you and the exit is one last bottleneck: the immigration queue. You inch forward with everyone else, passport in one hand, phone in the other, half awake and replaying the journey in your head. Eventually, you're called to the desk. The officer takes your passport, scans it, and starts with the standard questions in a calm, practiced voice. Where are you flying in from? How long will you stay? What are you coming to do? You answer honestly, just like millions of travelers do every year. Everything feels routine. Then the officer glances at your phone and says a single sentence that changes the whole atmosphere. Surprised, "Please unlock your phone and hand it to me." For a moment, your thoughts just stop. Because that rectangle in your hand isn't just a device. It holds your entire digital life. Family chats, old photos, years of messages, notes to yourself, private jokes with friends, things you never imagined a stranger might scroll through. You hesitate, not because you're hiding a crime, but because the request feels deeply personal. But you don't want trouble, and you don't want to be stuck in the airport all night. So you type in your code, the screen unlocks, and you pass it across the counter. 3 seconds. That's all it took. In those 3 seconds, without really thinking about it, you may have just made one of the most expensive privacy mistakes a traveler can make on arrival in the U.S. Not in terms of money, but in terms of how much of your life is now potentially visible. A few hours later, some passengers are already checking in at their hotels. Others are sitting in a quiet secondary inspection room, wondering how a standard arrival turned into a serious immigration review. Often, the difference between those two paths comes down to small details most people never learn before they fly. I'm Artur from Us Move and Money, and in this video we're going to talk about something that is rarely explained clearly to travelers. What border officers are allowed to look at on your phone when you land in the United States? How small decisions around your device can affect what's visible in that moment? And why misunderstandings about rights, visas, and technology can turn a normal entry into a major problem. Before we go any further, an important disclaimer. Nothing in this video is legal advice, financial advice, or individual immigration guidance. This is general information only. Always follow lawful instructions from border officers, and if you have concerns about your specific situation, speak with a qualified immigration or legal professional. Let's start with one of the biggest misconceptions, that the rules at the border are the same as the rules in everyday life inside the country. You may have heard about protections against unreasonable searches, especially that authorities usually need a warrant from a judge to go through your personal belongings, including your phone. Inside the U.S., in most day-to-day contexts, those protections are very real and very strong. At an international border, however, the legal framework is different. Airports, seaports, and land crossings are treated as special zones where the government has a broader mandate to control what and who enters the country. Under this border search authority, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers can inspect luggage, documents, and, in many situations, electronic devices without first getting a warrant. In simple terms, the privacy expectations you might be used to on the street do not apply in exactly the same way when you're at an immigration desk. This is where the first common mistake happens. Some travelers respond to a request to inspect a phone by trying to argue constitutional law with the officer. They might say things like, "You're not allowed to look at my phone without a warrant," or "You need probable cause to search this." Those statements reflect how people often understand their rights in domestic situations, but saying them in the middle of a primary inspection usually does not end the discussion. Instead, it often changes the tone of the interaction. From the officer's perspective, what could have been a quick check now looks like something that needs more attention. The usual next step is to send the traveler to secondary inspection, a separate area where officers have more time to go through documents, ask detailed questions, and sometimes look more closely at electronic devices. So a 2-minute routine interaction can turn into hours of waiting and interviews, not necessarily because of the phone itself, but because the conversation became confrontational. Understanding that border search rules are different doesn't mean you have no rights. It means the ground rules are not what most people expect, and that how you react can influence how complex the inspection becomes. Even for travelers who calmly cooperate, there's another detail that can dramatically change what an officer actually sees on a device. That brings us back to those 3 seconds at the counter. Think again about that moment. The officer asks you to unlock your phone. You enter your code or use Face ID, the screen lights up, and you hand the device over. It feels automatic, but there is one simple step that many people don't even think about: whether the phone is still connected to the internet when they pass it across. Why does that matter? Because of how modern smartphones handle data. We often talk about what's on my phone, but in reality, a lot of what you see, photos, messages, documents, is being constantly synchronized with remote servers. Messaging apps may load older chats or pull in cloud backups. Photo galleries sync new and old images from online storage. Email apps fetch new messages the moment they're opened. Notes, documents, and other apps quietly refresh in the background. Official guidance for basic device inspections generally focuses on information stored on the device itself. But if your phone is still on mobile data or airport Wi-Fi, opening an app can cause it to pull in additional content from the cloud in real time. An inbox fills up with older emails. Archived chats suddenly appear. Old photos that weren't fully stored locally begin to show. Within seconds, far more history may become visible than you thought was on the phone when you handed it over. From your perspective, it can feel like years of your digital life appeared out of nowhere, just because the device was still online. This is why many privacy-conscious travelers, including completely law-abiding ones, make a simple habit before handing over a phone. They switch off network connections, often by enabling airplane mode. That step doesn't delete or hide legitimate local data, and it does not change your obligation to comply with lawful instructions, but it can reduce the amount of extra information that suddenly sinks in while someone else is holding the device. The key idea here isn't about outsmarting anyone. It's about understanding that if your phone is unlocked and connected, modern apps can reveal far more than most people intend. Now let's talk about one specific app that comes up over and over in these stories: WhatsApp. Many people feel very secure using WhatsApp because they've heard about end-to-end encryption. That feature is genuinely powerful for one specific part of the process. It protects messages while they travel between devices over the internet, making it very hard for outsiders to read them in transit. But the moment a message arrives and you can see it on your screen, that protection has already done its job. On your phone, the message is displayed in regular text. Anyone with physical access to your unlocked device can scroll through those chats exactly as you do. So when a traveler unlocks their phone and passes it to an officer, encryption is no longer the barrier many imagine it to be. The chats are right there in order, sometimes going back months or years. And here's another piece many travelers miss. In the immigration context, officers aren't just looking for serious criminal activity. Often they are looking for relatively simple things, especially whether what you are saying at the counter matches what your digital footprint suggests about your plans. Immigration law cares a lot about intent. If you're entering the U.S. on a temporary visa, like a visitor visa, student visa, or many categories of work visa, you're expected to follow the rules attached to that status. A visitor visa, for example, is for short stays, tourism, family visits, similar activities. It does not authorize working in the U.S. without permission, and it doesn't allow you to quietly move there permanently. That's why officers sometimes look at digital conversations for signs that your real plans may be different from the purpose you're stating. Imagine you arrive saying you'll stay for 2 weeks to see relatives. But in a past chat, there's a message where you ask a cousin, "Can you help me find a job when I get there?" Even if you were half joking, taken out of context, it can raise doubts about whether you intend to respect the conditions of your visa. In many cases, the question isn't, "Is this person a criminal?" It's, "Does this person qualify to enter under the visa category they're using?" That's why phones, full of photos, notes, itineraries, and conversations, can have so much weight during inspections, even for people who believe they are doing nothing wrong. This also connects to an area where confusion is extremely common: The difference between the position of a temporary visa holder and that of a lawful permanent resident when they reach the border. On the surface, both might look similar in line. In legal terms, they are not. If you hold a temporary visa, tourist, student, many types of worker, you are effectively asking for permission to enter each time you arrive. The officer has to be comfortable that you are admissible and that you intend to follow the rules of your status. Because of that, refusing to participate in certain inspection procedures can lead the officer to conclude they cannot verify your eligibility. In those cases, they may deny admission and, in some instances, cancel the visa. That risk makes inspection interactions particularly sensitive for visa holders. A lawful permanent resident, someone with a green card, is in a different category. They already have the right to live long-term in the United States, and when they return from travel, they are generally seen as coming back home rather than as new visitors. Because of that status, the government cannot simply refuse them re-entry solely for declining to unlock a device. However, officers may still decide to temporarily keep a phone or laptop for further analysis, issuing a receipt and returning it later. So, permanent residents may have stronger protection against being turned away, but their devices can still be examined and the process can still become inconvenient and stressful. All of this creates a difficult balance for travelers, weighing personal privacy against the reality that border agencies have broad inspection powers and significant discretion. By understanding your own status in advance, temporary visitor, student, worker, or permanent resident, you can make more informed decisions if a difficult situation arises, instead of trying to figure it out under pressure. You might now be asking, once a phone leaves my hands, how deep can the inspection go? In practice, there are usually two main levels. The first is what most people imagine, a basic manual look. An officer holds the device, uses the regular interface, may swipe through photos, scroll through recent chats, or open certain apps and visible files. This tends to be relatively quick and happens right at the counter or in a nearby area. Because border inspections operate under broader legal authority, these basic checks can happen even without specific suspicion of you personally. They may be random or triggered by some detail of your travel. The second level is a much more technical, in-depth analysis. In this kind of advanced search, the device is connected to forensic tools capable of copying and examining large parts of its internal storage. Depending on the model and software, this may reveal more than you see in a normal scroll, sometimes including logs, metadata, and remnants of deleted content. Because this process is so intrusive, internal policies generally require officers to have a defined reason, often called reasonable suspicion of a legal violation or security concern, before using these tools. In other words, something in the interaction usually has to trigger that escalation. And that brings us to one more key point. Many travelers don't trigger concern through anything illegal, but through unintentional signals. Officers are trained to look for consistency. Do your answers, your documents, your luggage, and your visible digital life all tell the same story? If you say you're visiting for 10 days but are carrying luggage and personal items that look more like someone moving for a year, that may prompt questions. If your story keeps changing or your details don't match your visa type, the interview often gets longer. If your behavior is extremely agitated, beyond normal travel nerves, that can also increase concern. Another behavior that often draws attention is arriving with a phone that appears freshly wiped. Some travelers think, I'll just factory reset my phone the night before for maximum privacy. But to an officer, a device that looks brand new for someone who clearly uses technology every day can appear unusual. It may suggest that data was erased just before travel, which can by itself create the level of suspicion required to justify deeper analysis. In other words, aggressive attempts to strip away all data can sometimes attract more scrutiny than the original content ever would have. That's why seasoned travelers focus less on extreme hiding tactics and more on being truthful, consistent, and calm. When your documents, your explanation, and your visible digital footprint line up, interactions are more likely to remain routine. So what can you do before your next trip to put yourself in a better position? Think of border inspections the same way you would think of any important appointment. Preparation happens before you walk into the room. First, be aware of your digital footprint. Your phone likely contains years of conversations, screenshots, jokes, and notes that were never written with an immigration officer in mind. If you're on a temporary visa, it's worth asking yourself, is there anything here that could be misunderstood as planning to break the terms of my visa? The point isn't to become paranoid, it's to recognize that messages can be interpreted differently in a legal context. Second, consider how your apps are configured. Some travelers choose to log out of certain social or messaging platforms before they land. That doesn't erase data, but it does add an extra step before old content loads, and it can limit how quickly new information appears if someone taps those icons. Third, remember the connectivity issue. If you are lawfully complying with an instruction to unlock your phone, consider whether you want the device to stay online at that moment. Many privacy-aware travelers turn off wireless connections before handing the phone over so that apps don't silently pull in extra data from the cloud while the device is out of their hands. Whatever you do, it's important not to obstruct lawful searches or try to hide wrongdoing, but you can choose how your own technology is configured in good faith. Fourth, know your own status and limits. If you're entering on a visitor or student visa, your priority is usually to show you understand and intend to follow the rules of that visa. If you're a permanent resident returning home, the legal framework is different. Speaking with an immigration lawyer before travel can be very helpful if you're unsure where you stand or what your options are. Finally, focus on how you present yourself. Clear, honest, consistent answers, realistic travel plans, and steady behavior go a long way. In many cases, that matters just as much as anything on your phone. The bigger takeaway is this: airport inspections operate under a set of rules that most people never encounter until they are already at the counter. By then, it's too late to get informed. Our phones now hold our memories, plans, frustrations, and private thoughts. At an international border, that same device can become one of the main tools officers use to understand who you are and what you intend to do. That doesn't mean you should expect the worst. Millions of travelers enter the United States every year without any issues. The difference is that informed travelers know the environment they're walking into and take a few sensible, lawful steps before they go. Because when you're exhausted after a long flight, standing in front of an officer with your phone in your hand, that is not the moment you want to be discovering how CloudSync works, what Border Search Authority means, or how your visa category is interpreted. Preparation happens earlier. And sometimes, that preparation is as small as what you do in 3 seconds. The brief moment between unlocking your phone and handing it over. Given how much of our lives now lives on these devices, those few seconds and the choices you make before them can be surprisingly important.